I found the photos on a Tuesday. A completely ordinary Tuesday, the kind that starts with bad coffee and ends with you sitting on a kitchen floor realizing that every single thing you believed about your life was a performance staged specifically for you. My hands didn't shake. That's the part I keep coming back to. I'm sitting there scrolling through image after image, my wife, my brother, my bed, my couch, my garage, and my hands are completely steady, like a surgeon. Like a man reviewing seismic data at 3 in the morning, which, honestly, is probably the only reason I survived what came next. My name is Marcus. I'm 41 years old. I've spent the last 16 years as a seismic analysis consultant for private energy firms here in Houston. Before you picture something exciting, I spend most of my life staring at ground motion waveforms on a dual monitor setup in an office that smells like old coffee and printer toner. I'm good at it. Better than good. I notice patterns that other people dismiss as noise. That skill, reading what's hidden underneath it, saved my life. It just came about 2 years too late. I need you to understand who Renata was before I tell you what she did. Because if I don't do that, this becomes a simple story, and simple stories don't tell the truth. Renata built something real. She started her event floral design studio, Thornwood, out of our second bedroom with a used van, a vendor account at the Houston Flower Market on Airline Drive, and a refusal to fail that I genuinely admired. By the time everything fell apart, Thornwood was doing corporate galas at the Marriott Marquis, society weddings in River Oaks, charity fundraisers where the table arrangements cost more than our first car. She built that. Every arrangement, every client relationship, every early morning market run, I was proud of her. I told her that constantly. I want to be very clear about that, I told her. We have 2 kids. Jalen is 17 now, was 16 when this happened. He's the quiet one, built like a linebacker but spends all his time gaming and, it turns out, managing his mother's affair calendar like a part-time job. Our daughter Simone is 14, bright, funny, the kind of kid who walks into a room and somehow becomes its center of gravity without even trying. She used to leave her phone face up on the kitchen counter, charging cable dangling, nothing to hide, until she didn't anymore. And then there's Dion, my brother, 38 years old. He oversees sanitation and solid waste contract operations for the city's Northeast District. It sounds unglamorous, but the salary is solid. The benefits are good, and Dion knows how to work a room better than anyone I've ever met. We grew up together in 3rd Ward. Same cramped apartment, same secondhand school clothes, same understanding, formed somewhere around age 12, that the only people we could genuinely count on were each other. He had my back. I had his. That was the whole deal. Dion's marriage to Camille ended about 9 months before the Tuesday I found the photos. Honestly, good riddance to Camille. She was exhausting in a way I can't fully articulate, the kind of person who makes every gathering feel like a performance review. When the divorce finalized, Renata insisted we become Dion's anchor. Family shows up, she'd say, already setting an extra plate at the table before I'd agreed to anything. He started coming to Sunday dinners, then Thursday evenings, then Jalen's games, Simone's recitals, every holiday, every cookout, he was always there. I thought it was beautiful. I thought my family was holding my brother together. Looking back, and I've spent a lot of time looking back, the signs were there. Of course they were. There are always signs. I just didn't read them the way I read data. The inside jokes were the first thing. Renata and Dion developed this entire private vocabulary, these references and callbacks that would send them into laughter I wasn't part of. You had to be there, Renata would say, touching my arm, still laughing, and I'd smile like a good sport and nod. I told myself this was what healing looked like, my brother reconnecting with life, my wife making him feel welcome. I told myself this was love in action. Simone started being strange about her phone. She'd been the most careless kid: phone on the bathroom counter, phone on the kitchen floor, screen cracked twice from just leaving it places. Then suddenly she was carrying it everywhere, angled away, face down if she set it anywhere at all. I noticed. I filed it under 14-year-old girl stuff and kept moving. Jalen started offering to help Renata with her phone updates, app management, syncing issues. Every few days. She'd hand it to him, and he'd take it upstairs. When I once offered to help instead, I work with complex telemetry systems for a living. I think I can manage an iPhone update, he said. She preferred him to handle it, smiled and said it like it was nothing. I believed him. He was my son. There was one afternoon, maybe 3 months before everything broke, when I came home from the field with a splitting headache. Dion's truck was in my driveway. I walked into the kitchen and found him and Renata standing closer than people stand when they're doing nothing. They separated when they heard me. Renata's face was flushed. There was a flush to her neck that I associated, at the time, with the warm day. Dion said he'd been helping her move the new KitchenAid mixer she'd ordered. I looked at the counter. The mixer was in the exact spot it had lived for 2 years. Nobody had moved anything. I was too tired and headache-ridden to push. I made a joke about heavy appliances. Dion laughed too loudly, I remember thinking. Just a half second too long and I went to lie down. Honestly, I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you watching this have been in moments exactly like that, where your gut said one thing and your exhaustion, your trust, your love said something else, where you made the choice to believe the story you were being told instead of the one your body was screaming at you. I made that choice over and over. For 2 years. And I want you to know I don't blame myself for it because trust isn't stupidity, it's a gift. What matters is what you do when the gift gets used against you. My work takes me into the field regularly, remote sensor stations along the Gulf Coast fault systems, sites with no reliable cell service, sometimes for 3 or 4 days at a stretch. The energy companies I contract with need eyes on seismic readings that automated systems can't fully interpret. When I'd pack for these trips, Renata would kiss me goodbye. Dion would text, "Don't worry about anything, bro. I've got them." I used to find that comforting. I used to actually feel grateful. The Tuesday, everything changed. I was supposed to be gone for 4 days monitoring a coastal grid. There had been some unusual readings near Matagorda Bay that my department wanted documented. I drove out Tuesday morning, got to the site, and found that the senior technician had run full diagnostics the night before. False alarm. Equipment calibration drift. My supervisor called me before I'd even opened my field kit. "Go home, Marcus. Enjoy the day. You've got the hours coming." I stopped at the bakery on Westheimer, the one Renata talked about constantly, these praline-glazed croissants she'd been wanting to try. I thought I'd bring a box, surprise her at Thornwood, maybe take her to lunch. But when I drove past the shop, her assistant Priya was there alone, told me Renata had taken a personal day. Hadn't mentioned feeling sick that morning. That's odd, I thought. Filed it. Kept driving home. The house was quiet. Her car wasn't in the garage. Dion's truck wasn't there either. Jalen and Simone were at school. I set the croissants on the counter. Went out to the garage to grab my backup sensor array, figured I'd use the free time to update my home monitoring setup, calibrate some equipment I'd been meaning to get to. That's when I noticed Jalen's tablet on the kitchen island. Screen still lit. He must have left it in his morning rush. A notification banner slid across the top. I almost ignored it. New items added to hidden folder Mom's archive. My finger hovered. I tapped. The album opened without a password. Of course it did. Why would a 16-year-old password protect something hidden inside his own device? The first image stopped every biological process in my body for what felt like a full minute. Renata in our bedroom, in lingerie I'd given her for our anniversary 2 years prior. Angle wrong. Not taken by me, taken from where I usually sleep. Dion's tattooed forearm visible at the frame's edge. I kept scrolling. I kept my breathing steady. I cataloged like I was reviewing waveform data. This is what training does to you. It gives you a protocol for the moments when protocol is the only thing keeping you upright. Dozens of photos. Then hundreds. Renata and Dion at the Marriott Marquis downtown. Timestamp. A Thursday afternoon last spring when she'd told me she had a floral industry networking luncheon. I had been on site in Beaumont that day. Our living room sectional couch. Dion's city-issue work jacket on the floor. Timestamp. A Saturday morning in January, Simone's birthday. I had been at the Wortham Center setting up the surprise dinner while Renata stayed home to keep Simone distracted. Our shower. My garage. The parking lot of Jalen's high school during freshman orientation while I was presenting at a Houston Geological Society conference. 2 years. The oldest photo was dated 2 days after Dion's separation from Camille, the night he'd appeared at our door devastated, red-eyed, asking if he could sleep in our guest room. I had held my brother on our porch and told him it would be okay. I kept scrolling. And then I found the folders. That's what broke something loose in me, not the photos themselves, but the organization. Someone had sorted everything into labeled folders. Marcus Field Survey March, Conference Week Chicago. Matagorda Trip, each folder containing photos organized by date and location, cross-referenced with my work schedule. A filing system that took real effort to build. The kind of administrative precision a teenager would apply if a trusted adult had explained to him that this was important, that this needed to stay organized. My son was their archivist. I found the messages next, screenshots saved among the photos. Renata to Dion, Marcus bought the equipment malfunction story. We have the whole weekend. Dion to Renata. Jalen cleared the front door camera footage like you asked. Kids getting good. Renata to Dion. Simone's covering tomorrow. Told M I'm taking her shopping for school uniforms. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because my legs gave out, I don't want to dramatize this into something it wasn't. I sat down because sitting down felt like the only honest response to what I was reading. My children were not just aware of this. They were operational. They had been recruited, trained, compensated, and I would find that part out later to function as support infrastructure for the systematic dismantling of my life. There was one more folder, recent last month, photos from a week ago, when I'd been at a conference in San Antonio. And on the nightstand in one of them, I had to pinch and zoom, hands still completely, almost supernaturally steady, was a document. Partially visible. Letterhead from a psychiatric practice on the 610 loop I recognized from billboards. A form with my name at the top. Patient presents with signs of paranoid ideation and obsessive behavioral patterns. Below that, partially cut off. Spouse requesting assessment for voluntary hold consideration. They weren't just building a life behind my back. They were building a case against my mind. I want to be honest with you right now, the way I'd want someone to be honest with me. Sitting there on my kitchen floor with that tablet in my hands, I felt something I did not expect to feel. I felt respect. Not for what they'd done was one of the most elaborate betrayals I'd ever encountered. But they had built something. A 2-year operation, interlocking components, contingency planning, digital evidence management. They had looked at me and decided I was the kind of man who needed to be neutralized rather than confronted, and they had built a system to do it. If I hadn't come home a day early on a false alarm, it might have worked. Too bad I've spent 16 years finding signals inside noise. I moved fast and methodically. First, I took screenshots of everything, uploaded to 3 separate cloud accounts, emailed copies to a dummy address I created on my phone in the driveway. Then I went back inside, placed Jalen's tablet at exactly the angle it had been 43 degrees off the counter edge. Home button facing the entryway, screen dimmed, and I poured myself a cup of coffee. They came home 20 minutes later. Renata's laugh through the window first, then Dion's voice, lower, responding, then the kids. "Marcus?" Renata called out from the entryway. Surprise in her voice. Not panic, just surprise. "Honey, you're home." I turned around from the counter with a full coffee mug and a smile. I had absolutely no difficulty manufacturing. "Equipment fault at the base site," I said. "False alarm. Thought I'd come surprise my people." Dion was in the doorway with grocery bags. Our eyes met. "Hey bro," he said. "Good to see you." "Good to see you too," I said, and I meant it as something entirely different than he heard. That night, Dion grilled steaks. Renata made her roasted corn salad. The kids had their phones out but were present in the way teenagers are present, half here, half somewhere else. I laughed at the right moments. I asked Simone about her earth science project. She wanted help understanding tectonic plates. I told her I'd be happy to explain everything. For the next 11 days, I was the most attentive husband, the most present father, the most loyal brother anyone in that house had ever seen. And every night, after everyone was asleep, I worked. I installed monitoring software on every device in the house during what I announced as a home network security upgrade. I told Renata I'd been reading about household identity theft. She thanked me for being proactive. Dion said he should do the same thing at his place. I offered to help him set it up. He said he'd take me up on that. What I found over those 11 days would have been enough to destroy 3 people with far less motive than I had. Renata had been quietly draining money from Thornwood for 22 months. Small amounts, $40 here, $120 there, cash transactions buried in vendor payments. Over the full period, $37,000, divided across 3 accounts in her name alone that I had never seen. The business was her perfect mechanism. She knew every invoicing line. She'd built the books herself. Dion was worse. He had been using fragments of my identity, my social security number, my professional credentials, my credit history to incorporate shell consulting firms, waste management advisory companies that existed only on paper. He'd been funneling city contract overages into these entities for years. What made it elegant, from a criminal standpoint, was that the paper trail, examined quickly and without context, would lead to me. He had been building me as the fall guy for his own theft. My brother, who I had held on a porch and promised things would be okay, had been constructing my prosecution while I was in the field reading ground vibrations. The children were being paid. I found the transfers. $500 each time Simone provided cover. $3,000 deposited in chunks into a separate account linked to Jalen's gaming setup purchases in exchange for what the messages described as digital management. My son's $3,000 rig, which I had admired, which I had helped him set up in his room, had been purchased with money earned by archiving evidence of my betrayal. On day 8, My phone rang at 1:01 p.m. Unknown local number, I answered. Marcus. It's Warren Okafor. We went through the Structural Engineering Society together, Houston chapter, 2015 cohort. You probably don't remember me. Listen, someone called our legal office today asking about the process for pursuing an involuntary psychiatric hold in Harris County. They mentioned your name. Specifically, I kept my voice completely even. I said, Warren, I remember you. Tell me exactly what they asked. It was a woman, said she was your wife. Wanted to know about asset protection provisions during psychiatric holds, whether family could initiate without prior notice, whether weekend filings were harder to contest. Marcus, I've done this work long enough to know when something feels wrong. I don't know your situation, but I thought you'd want to know. Someone's asking the right questions to move fast. I said, you just gave me everything I needed. Send me a consultation invoice. Whatever the rate is, I'll double it. After I hung up, I sat in the dark of my home office surrounded by printed records and felt the timeline collapse. They were moving. This weekend, most likely Saturday filing, slower court response, harder to contest before Monday. I had perhaps 60 hours. I didn't sleep that night. By Thursday morning, every joint account was emptied legally, as both parties have equal access and redirected to new accounts in my name only. The investment portfolio liquidated, early withdrawal penalties irrelevant in the context of what I was protecting. The house listed with a cash buyer I had already identified through a wholesale real estate firm, 62% of market value, closing in 24 hours. Both vehicles were in my name. I sold them both for cash, told Renata hers was going in for a recall service she'd been putting off. Jalen and Simone's college funds were held in accounts where I served as primary account holder. Their mother listed as beneficiary, not guardian, not joint holder. Legally mine to withdraw. I withdrew them. I want to tell you that was an easy decision. It wasn't. Those were my children's futures. But those accounts had also been partially funded by money earned through my own humiliation, managed by a 16-year-old boy who had been turned into a tool. The money would find its way back to them, just not yet. Not until they were old enough to understand what it had cost. Dion's shell companies, the ones he'd built using my identity, I filed them properly, made them legal. Then I filed 5 years of tax returns for each entity, showing substantial revenue that Dion had never declared. I paid the initial taxes to establish legitimacy. The IRS would eventually come looking for the rest, with compounding penalties, and the paper trail would be unmistakably his. I sent an anonymous tip to the City of Houston Controller's office, flagging irregularities in Northeast District, solid waste contract billing. I attached just enough transaction records, vendor comparisons, account numbers to warrant a formal audit. The money in the accounts I'd opened in Dion's name using his own carelessly stored credentials would surface during that audit. His real theft would emerge alongside the appearance of more theft, and no one who had been stealing from the city for 5 years was going to be believed when they claimed someone had set them up. On Friday night, I made pasta. My grandmother's recipe, the one I'd made on my first date with Renata, 17 years ago at our apartment in Midtown. I opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. I invited Dion over. He brought dessert. The kids put their phones down and actually talked. Simone asked me to explain how fault lines work over dinner, and I spent 20 minutes walking her through tectonic pressure, stress accumulation, the way energy builds silently for years before it releases. I said, the thing most people don't understand about earthquakes is that the ground isn't breaking when it finally moves. It's releasing something that's been building for a long time. You don't cause the earthquake by noticing it. It was always going to happen. Dion laughed a little nervously and said I was getting philosophical. I looked at him and said, just appreciating stability while it lasts. You never know when everything shifts overnight. He held my gaze a half second too long, then looked away. Renata squeezed my hand across the table and said, well, we're not going anywhere. No, I agreed, you're not. After dinner, I helped clean up. I hugged both my kids and told them I loved them. I meant it. They had been turned into weapons, but they were still mine. What had been done to them was as much a betrayal of them as it was of me, and I have never, not for a single day, forgotten that. At 3 a.m. I stood in our bedroom for the last time, 2 bags packed. One-way flight to Prague booked under my name. From there I had a connection to Auckland and a job offer from a New Zealand geotechnical firm I'd been quietly cultivating for 6 months. I had 17 hours before boarding. I left 3 envelopes on the kitchen counter. One for Renata, one for Dion, one for the kids. Each contained a single photograph and 4 words. I know everything. Goodbye. The text started before I reached the airport. Renata. What is this? Marcus, what did you do? Dion. Bro, call me right now. This isn't funny. I turned my phone off at security and didn't turn it back on until I was over the Atlantic. I watched my old life detonate from a coffee shop in Prague. Social media, public records, news alerts I'd set up before I left. It unfolded like a seismic sequence: foreshock, main shock, aftershock, each one bigger. Renata discovered the empty accounts on Saturday morning. The Instagram post she'd planned about Thornwood's fall season became a desperate Facebook message asking if anyone had seen her husband. Her business credit card declined at the wholesale flower market Sunday morning. Vendor invoices, she'd been floating $22,000 in outstanding orders, triggered automatic collection notices. The studio's operating account had nothing in it. The entire Thornwood infrastructure, which had run partially on lines of credit Renata had opened using our joint financial history, began to collapse within 48 hours of my departure. Dion was arrested at work Monday morning during the shift briefing. The controller's office had moved with unusual speed. Apparently, there had been an ongoing inquiry into his district already, and my tip was the detail that cracked it open. They walked him out in handcuffs in front of his crew. Someone filmed it on a phone. It was on 3 local news sites by noon. What I had not fully anticipated was how much he'd actually stolen. I'd built a frame around a real painting. When investigators dug into the accounts, they found the authentic embezzlement underneath the layer I'd arranged on top. He hadn't been stealing for the 5 years I'd documented. He'd been stealing for 9. The charges went federal because the waste management contracts crossed county lines. The house foreclosure notice posted Tuesday. The cash sale had closed legally. My property, my decision. The new owners took possession immediately. Renata arrived with a police escort to collect belongings and found that she had no legal claim to a home she no longer lived in as a matter of title. Her attorney, reached through emergency services, told her there was nothing to be done quickly. Her attorney was paid with a credit card that declined. The kids' schools called Wednesday about overdue tuition. Renata had apparently been using the float from various accounts, including, I later learned, the children's college funds she'd believed she had access to cover current expenses. She didn't. Jalen was suspended from the baseball travel team pending payment. Simone's studio membership was placed on hold. By the following Friday, 11 days after I'd left, Renata and Dion had turned on each other publicly. She posted about his recklessness. He responded by confirming the affair and claiming she had initiated everything, had manipulated him when he was vulnerable. The comment section became a document of 2 people drowning and blaming each other for the water. Family members took sides, friends disappeared, their parents got involved. It became exactly the kind of public collapse that people in Houston's professional circles talk about for years. What happened to Jalen and Simone hurt me most to watch. Jalen posted a fundraising plea about his college fund. Someone I never found out who leaked one of the tablet screenshots in response, asking publicly why he'd helped conceal the affair. The replies were not kind. He was 17. Simone's social group fractured. Parents of her friends began restricting contact. She'd been known as someone who lied for money, and 14-year-olds are not known for their forgiveness or their nuance. My consulting firm in Auckland grew faster than I could have imagined. It turns out that when you can demonstrate genuine 72-hour accuracy on seismic event prediction, not just probability modeling, but actual predictive precision, governments pay attention in ways they don't when you're embedded in a corporate structure. Mining companies, infrastructure firms, sovereign wealth fund insurance divisions. Within 10 months, I had 14 staff and contracts that exceeded my previous 5-year earnings combined. The universe, as I've come to understand it, has a particular sense of humor. My firm won a multi-year contract with a Pacific Coast fault monitoring consortium that required periodic on-site work in California. My first trip back to the United States was 14 months after the Tuesday I'd sat on my kitchen floor. I stayed at a business hotel downtown. I had meetings. I wore suits I'd bought in Auckland. I presented findings in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the skyline and felt, for the first time in my adult life, like the version of myself that had always existed underneath the version I'd agreed to be. On my last morning, the hotel's coffee machine was under maintenance. The front desk recommended a diner 2 blocks west on Westheimer. I knew that diner. I had eaten breakfast there the morning after my first date with Renata, 16 years prior. She used to say it was beneath us whenever we drove past it in later years. She used to say that with a little laugh, like the past was embarrassing. I should have gone somewhere else. I walked in anyway. The breakfast rush was thinning, worn linoleum, vinyl booths patched with electrical tape, the same laminated menu I remembered from being 25 and optimistic. A server was refilling coffee at a corner table, her back to the door. She turned around. Renata. In the diner uniform, Her hair in a simple ponytail, not styled, no design or anything, no manicure. Her name tag said Renata N, just the first name, and an initial, no last name, no wedding ring. She looked at me across maybe 12 feet of diner floor, and the coffee pot shook once, hard, and steadied. She said, "Coffee?" I said, "Black, no sugar." She poured without spilling, which I suspect took everything she had. Up close, in the flat light of a Houston diner morning, I could see what 14 months had done to her face. Not in a cruel way, I don't want to describe it cruelly. She looked real in a way she hadn't looked in years. The performance was gone. This was what she actually looked like when there was no performance left to give. I pulled out my phone, started reviewing my morning emails. I wasn't going to make a speech. I wasn't going to list grievances. I had no desire to perform victory any more than she'd expected to perform service. She came back 5 minutes later and set down a plate I hadn't ordered. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, hash browns crispy. She stood there not quite looking at me, not quite looking away. I said, "I didn't order this." She said, very quietly, "It's what you always got. Every Sunday morning when we'd been out the night before, you always got this." I said, "That was a different life." One tear, just one, ran down the side of her face and she didn't wipe it. She said, "I destroyed everything." "Yes," I said, "you did." Then she said something I hadn't expected. She said, "I think I believed after a while that you wouldn't notice, that you were so far inside your work that you'd just not see it. And then it had gone on long enough that stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. And then I don't know. Then it became something else, something I couldn't explain anymore." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the version of her I'd married. The woman who drove a used van to the flower market at 4 in the morning because she believed in something she was building. I thought about the fact that the belief had been real even if everything after it hadn't been. I said, "You didn't fail because you fell in love with the wrong person. You failed because you decided I was someone who could be managed instead of someone who deserved the truth. That's not a love story. That's a project." A customer called for a refill. She started to go. Stopped, said, "For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry." I took a bite of toast. Thought about what I actually wanted to say. Then I said, "I know you are. I also know that sorry is the thing people say when they want forgiveness before they've earned it. I don't need anything from you anymore, Renata. That's the most honest thing I can tell you." I finished breakfast, left $1,500 on the counter, not for her, not as a statement, but because I remembered what it felt like to be 25 and optimistic in a diner booth, and I wanted to honor that person even if the person across from me had forgotten he existed. I walked out. Behind me I heard her say something, very softly. I didn't turn around. I had learned something in 16 years of seismic work that applies to more than geology. Not every wave needs to be measured to be survived. Some events you just need to feel move through you, and then you plant your feet on whatever's left, and you build from there. My flight left in 2 hours. Auckland was home. I had a business to run, a staff of 14 counting on me, a Pacific fault system to map, and a future I had built with my own hands on the far side of the earth. The ground had shifted. Everything built on a false foundation had collapsed. What was left was solid because I had placed it there myself, on ground I had chosen, on terms I had set. I didn't look back as I walked to my car. Some earthquakes you don't predict. You just survive them, build better, and go on. Now I want to ask you something before I go, and I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments. If you were in Marcus's position, if you found what he found, if you had the capability to do what he did, would you have done the same? Comment 1 if you think he went too far. Comment 2 if you think he did exactly what the situation demanded. Comment 3 if you would have confronted them face to face instead of disappearing. I read every single comment, and I will respond to as many as I can. Also, where are you watching this from, and what time is it there right now? I always love knowing who's in this with me. And if you've ever experienced a betrayal that came from inside your own house, from the people who were supposed to be your safe place, I hope this story gave you something. Even if it's just the knowledge that you're not the only one who kept their hands steady when the world was falling apart. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing. I tell stories like this every week, stories about the hidden fault lines in the lives we think we know. There are more coming. I'd love for you to be here for them. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is entirely coincidental.